What's up, sons? It's Blind Rod with Simon Tech once again, and we're going back to the roots of the channel, and that's going to be some video game performance testing. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Evil Within 2 and the performance of it on the Ryzen 5 2400G APU, so we're not going to be using any discrete graphics cards here. And if you're actually looking for the best settings for this game, no matter what system you're running, this should give you some insight into which settings are affecting frame rate the most, so stick around. Welcome back. So the Evil Within 2 is one of the latest titles from Bethesda as well as Tango Gameworks. It does show a huge amount of improvement for the PC port over the first one. I actually probably have a couple videos covering the first one and how to get rid of those stupid black bars and unlock the frame rate, because those were both issues in the previous title. The Evil Within 2 actually has a pretty nice settings menu along with options to unlock the frame rate or lock it, of course, with VSync if you prefer, and allows you to turn off some of those annoying settings like film grain, depth of field, and so on and so forth. Hopping right into it, the test bench is a Ryzen 5 2400G. It's under a custom loop, which is Raven. I'll link that up here for you guys, but I did stay conservative on the overclocks. The CPU we kept at 3.9 gigahertz, while on the actual APU GPU portion we had set to a 1525 megahertz core clock and a 1200 memory clock. The memory that we're running, so the system RAM, which is shared of course with the GPU itself, is going to be the G.Skill FlareX 3200 megahertz. So it is a dual channel kit and some of the best that you can get with very low 14 CAS latency. We are running the game on an NVMe drive from AData, and that pretty much covers the entire system. The first round of tests we did was seeing if we could play the game at 1080p. This failed pretty miserably, even staying below 20 FPS in a lot of areas, so we decided to bump down to 1600 by 900. And unfortunately, this didn't even get us close to an average of 30 FPS, so we had to go down even further to 1280 by 720. So yes, if you are going to want to play the Evil Within 2 on your Ryzen 5 2400G, you're going to be looking at a 720p experience, which is a little disappointing. However, once we were at 720p, we went ahead and took a look at the performance at 720p Ultra and 720p Low. As you guys can see here, that we'll be throwing a chart up. The max FPS with low preset was 42 FPS, while on Ultra was 37 FPS. However, if we move on to the average, which is really what we want to be looking at here, the average FPS at Ultra falls below that nice 30 FPS, which is what I would consider, playable, at 28.73, while on Low, we had a frame rate of 35 FPS. The mins go all the way down to 24 on the Ultra setting, and on the Low setting it's 29, but that's a little deceptive. I took a look at the frame timings, and a lot of that is in the very 0.1% lows, and it doesn't actually show to kind of push us into an unplayable frame rate at all. So playable at 720p Low. However, we want to get the best experience, of course, out of our games, and the way we're going to be able to do that is to dive into the settings menu and start tweaking some stuff to get the best looking game out of our system. So this is the part where I say, if you guys are trying to find the best settings for, of course, this title, no matter what GPU you're running, this is going to be a pretty good insight here. And what I like to do is essentially go in and test the game with each setting individually until I find the setting that affects the frame rate the most. That way we know which settings we need to go ahead and compromise on to get ourselves the best experience. So once I went through all of those tests, we were able to find two settings that pretty much affected frame rate the most. And these two settings were going to be the anti-aliasing as well as the depth of field quality. Now, unfortunately, because this is a horror title, I will mention that the depth of field quality and having depth of field on as opposed to off does help with immersion in this particular title. Unfortunately, in this case, you're going to see an improvement of about 7% on your frame rate if you turn depth of field off. and turn that depth of field quality down to low, or I would recommend turning it down to low and getting that 7% gain, but still having the setting enabled as it were. Now, the next setting was anti-aliasing, and that was kind of a gimme here. At 720p, the downside here is that anti-aliasing is very noticeable. The good news is while you would see a percent change in FPS of almost 12% with anti-aliasing off, you can get away with getting over 30 FPS in this title on the 2400G by just turning it to TAA, which does offer quite a bit better quality over something like FXAA and cleans up the image enough that at 720p the title looks pretty good. The rest of the settings were actually minuscule, if anything at all, possibly even what I would call beyond reasonable doubt of it doing anything. In fact, I didn't even actually really notice it changing the visual quality in the game, so I don't know if these are faux settings or if my eye's just not good enough to quite pick it up. But you are going to be able to turn all of them to high or enabled, whichever ones you prefer or enjoy. For example, if you don't enjoy motion blur, go ahead and turn it off, so on and so forth. One of the ones that I thought was going to affect it was the textures on faraway objects being turned down when you are further away from them, and that didn't affect frame rate, at least in the use case that I had it set in. So I'm not really sure if it actually does anything. It definitely doesn't have any resolution scaling options either, so I don't know if those would come later as they add support maybe for the Xbox One X or the PlayStation 4 Pro, but as it stands now, you're not going to have any resolution scale options, which for the Ryzen 5 2400G, it's a little disappointing because it'd be nice to scale that up if possible, or scale it down, of course, if possible. Overall, The Evil Within 2 is a great improvement over the first entry for PC players, and I'm glad to see that they are making the effort to go ahead and include the PC market into their consideration when developing a game. And I think Bethesda is getting a lot better at that as a publisher, and of course their studios, as they hire them on, I'm sure are getting the memos, because as we can see here, we went from a very, very terrible port with the first one, still a good game by the way, but a very terrible port, to something that is what I would call acceptable. Now, if we're talking about the Ryzen 5 2400G being able to keep up and play the latest titles, unfortunately, if you don't have the best memory, and even if you do, which we do in this test system, you're not going to get a 1080p playable experience in a lot of the latest AAA kind of titles here, and that's a little disappointing. However, 1280 by 720 is playable at 30 FPS, so you know, if you're looking at wanting to just be able to play the game on a budget, you're going to be able to do it. I'll leave the links to all the parts in the description below, as well as a link to the Steam sale for the game, of course, as well. So if you guys are interested in this type of content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. You can always watch me live over at twitch.tv/sonofatech_, where I will be completing the playthrough for this title, and I will see you next Tuesday.